Hi, it's Will, and this is the fourth video in a series of tutorial videos we're working on in order to build our first ASPIK plugin. And in this plugin, we have a glorified volume plugin that has 4 parameters. In the very last video, we talked about these 4 parameters and the fact that they have 4 individual control ID values and that they are bound to 4 plugin variables here. The volume parameter is a continuous parameter because it puts out a range of numerical values along a predefined minimum and maximum. We're connecting it to a double. You can also connect a continuous variable to a float or to an int. So this knob can or slider can put out an int value as well. Mute and channels are called string list parameters. They use a string list and the position in the list to dictate what the value of the variable is. For a mute, we have on and off and on. Those are the 2 strings. They connect to this enable mute integer. For channels, we have stereo left and right. Those are 3 strings that we type in, and they connect to the channels variable here. The VU meter will connect to a floating point value called VU meter here. Now we took a look at these controls in a table as well. So we have the Gui Control Tables. This example is in the SDK, so all this is documented for you. The volume control is right here. You can see min, max, and default and the name of the variable, etc. So we're going to be referring to this table when we write the code for these parameters. The good news is we only have to write a tiny fraction of the amount of code you normally have to write when you develop a plugin in any API or in any framework. We're going to be using a tool to help us do that. The thing that we have to do first, the only thing we have to do manually, is to set up an enumeration system for the 4 variables that we have here. And we're going to be using a simple enumeration that's going to make volume 0, mute 1, channel select 2, and VU 3. So 0, 1, 2, 3. We're going to use a plain enumeration here, just enum, control ID is the prefix, and then the 4 enumerated values are identical to the 4 underlying bound variables we will connect the GUI to. And I'm using this just so that I don't have to remember 0, 1, 2, and 3. It gives me an easy way to connect those things up. I type control ID, : then the name of the variable. That gives me the number 0, 1, 2, 3 automatically. You can do however you want. You can put numbers in, you can put in your own enumeration, put in constant defines. It's up to you. I'm going to use this. So what I've done is I've cut and pasted this, and I've put it into the plugin core.h file at the very top here. In between these hex codes, I've put in that enumeration, and it is now waiting and ready to go. And I'll show you how I use control ID : in a minute. So there is the enumeration, and the next thing that we're going to do is declare the bound variables that are going to go into the private declaration area here, and then we are going to create the C++ object instantiation code, which is going to go in init plugin parameters here. We're going to have a tool do all that for us, so we're not going to have to type in any code by hand. The tool that we're using is part of the SDK. It comes in the ASPIKreator folder. We're on Mac OS, so I'm going to use the Mac version here. You can see it has 2 halves. The first part creates projects, and the second part creates GUI code. If you are on Windows, there is a Windows version that has 2 halves. The 2 halves, the 2 sets are identical, so all the controls, everything is located in the exact same location, in the exact same spot on each half. So it doesn't matter which one you use. You can use the Mac version here to create Windows plugins and vice versa, because in ASPIK, the plugin is just a package of files. And we've already created 1 plugin project, and we'll do many more in videos to follow. So the first thing I want to do is get that volume parameter encoded here, volume in dB. So I'm going to be looking at this line out of the table, which gives me all the information I need to put into this tool, especially noting volume _ dB is the linked variable. So I'm going to come here on the first panel, Project Creator. I'm going to click Automatic Parameter Smoothing 20 milliseconds. I'm not going to create a new project because we already did that. But I am going to connect this. This value is carried over to the other panel. so I can get parameter smoothing code written for free for me. You can also write the code yourself. It takes 2 lines of code, so it's not horrible. The name of the variable here is volume. The control ID is going to be control ID : and then volume underscore dB. Volume underscore dB is the name of the variable, which is going to go here. I'm going to click enable variable binding, and the data type is a double. So this sets up the variable binding to this, this double data type here. It's a continuous numeric control in dB. The minimum is minus 60 dB, and the maximum is 12 dB. Default is 0. Control taper is linear, and I'm going to leave precision and interpret as default 2 and double. The double here is part of the variable binding with our variable up here. So I'll go ahead and write the code for the variable first. Variable to clipboard, you just push that button, come back into, go back into Xcode, and in the private area here, I'll paste in the variable volume underscore dB. Go back here. I'll use the code to clipboard button to make the C++ object, but because this is the very first variable, I'm going to check include plugin parameter declaration, hit code to clipboard, come over here to the CPP file and init plugin parameters, and then just hit the paste button and paste that in. That checkbox wrote that first line of code. We only have to do that once, so we'll uncheck that box for the rest of them. Here is the definition for the plugin parameter. I'll let you take a look at that constructor on your own time. Here's a couple of lines of code for setting the parameter smoothing, and then the bounding, the variable binding to the volume underscore dB variable is here. Call the add plugin parameter function to add it. Of course, you can write all this code in by hand if you really want to. Let's move on to the next parameter. The next parameter that we have is the mute switch. It's an on-off switch. Enable mute is the name of the variable. So we'll come back here. I'll name it mute. The control ID will be control ID : enable mute. I'll cut and paste that variable to right here, enable mute. It's going to be an integer variable, and variable binding is on. It's a string list switch, an on-off switch. The string list here is going to be off and on. You can change this to a different language if you want to, or put different values inside of here, but default is going to be the first value, which is off or 0. So you can choose off or on as the default state of this switch here. So now I'll hit variable to clipboard, and I'll come back to Xcode. In the .h file, I'm going to hit paste, and now I get 2 entries. The first entry is the bound variable that I defined enable mute. The second is a strongly typed enumeration called enable mute, which is the name of the variable plus the word enum following it. This is what is ultimately the string list for this parameter. I'll talk more about why I do this later. It makes the code easier to read, and we don't have to compare against strings. Anytime you're writing code that's comparing against strings, you're setting yourself up to have problems. So this mechanism of using the strongly typed enum is going to get around having to compare things with strings. Like I said, we'll get more about that, get more into that later. We'll need to paste down its C++ declaration here. So I'll go back to my helper, uncheck the include plugin parameter declaration, code to clipboard, come back here and hit the paste button, and there is the mute button parameter. We'll come back here. The next thing we have is called channels. The variable name is all lowercase, and I'll cut and paste that to the variable here. It's going to be an integer data type as well. It's going to be a string list switch here, and the 3 strings are stereo, left, and right. So we type those in separated by commas. The default string is going to be item number 0, which is stereo. You can change that here. And I'll hit variable to clipboard, paste. Oh, oops, sorry, I'm in the wrong location. Plugin core.h in the variable declaration. Here we are. So here's the channels, and here is the strongly typed enum. We'll come back to the C++ declaration of the object, code to clipboard, paste that in. So there is our three-way plugin parameter right here. We've got one more parameter, and that is the VU meter itself. And so I'm going to give it the name VU. The variable name is VU capital M meter, and I'll cut and paste that into the variable name here. It's going to be a float. It is going to be a meter with an attack time of 10, a release time of 500 milliseconds. Detect mode is RMS, and the calibration is logarithmic. And that stuff all came from the table right here. Logarithmic, RMS, and attack and release. So that's now inserted in here. I'll do variable to clipboard one more time. Come back to plugin core.h and paste that in here. So there's our VU meter variable. We'll come here, do code to clipboard, back here, and then paste that in. There is the C++ declaration for our VU meter parameter. So all of our parameters are in, all of our bound variables are in, the enumeration is in. You can see in the plugin parameter declaration here, if I take a look at that constructor and say jump to definition, you can see that it's an int for the control ID. And this evaluates out to an int, control ID : volume underscore dB. So that evaluates out to the number 0. That's why I name the control IDs the same as the variable names themselves. I'll go ahead and build this by hitting Command B to do the build. This built the AU version of the plugin. You'll remember that we did a universal plugin, but I'm only going to be working on the AU for debugging it. You can see that I've been working in the volume plugin AU chunk of Xcode here, operating on its plugin core and plugin.h. The AAX and the VST also have a plugin kernel, and they connect to the exact same files. So there's plugin core, .cpp, and there's plugin core.h. You edit one of these files, and you're editing all of them for all of the separate projects. So that build succeeded. We're ready to go on to the next video where we're going to connect the controls up and process the audio.